Welcome to ReReview, where we watch movies from our past with a perspective from today. Your hosts are Matt, Bobby, and Austin, and we have an immense love for the films of our youth, so we're taking a look back to see if they still hold up. On this episode, we're discussing The Big Lebowski. It's released in 1998 and directed by Joel and Ethan Coen. It stars Jeff Bridges, John Goodman, and Julianne Moore. This movie tells the story of a man trying to get compensation for a rug, and he also goes bowling. Now, this is a fair warning. We will be spoiling a 23-year-old movie, so if you haven't seen it, we will be revealing key plot points. This is my choice, so I'll open up our discussion. I think back on this film. I did not see it when it came out in 1998. I saw it in an old theater, the kind of theater that plays films from times past, but still in my 20s. And it was ultimately, a film that I think was already getting close to its 10-year anniversary when I first saw it. I remember sitting in that theater, old-timey seats, not the stadium seating, not as comfortable as things could have been, but feeling the odd pacing of the film back then and going like, this is a weird, quirky romp. And I left the theater satisfied. I distinctly remember leaving the theater satisfied. So now watching this film, I am a bit surprised at how that same quirky level of utter shenanigans that I guess the film does didn't really hit or land with me the way I was kind of hoping it might still. And I think maybe part of it is that younger me who liked quirky weirdness, maybe that has diminished somewhat, that the kind of nature that this film presents is it's just not landing the way it did. I looked at it and I said to myself, this is a high as hell movie. And I felt like with the character, with the dude seeming permanently high, with the random like interludes of drugged induced or a coma induced scenes that were just as squirrely and weird. I just said, is this just a big old art film? Like just the biggest old art film ever that was made at your local junior college and then somehow got released in the biggest way that people came to love. And maybe I'm just not that big old art film person anymore. Look, I'm here for the idea of saying, being a simple person with simple philosophies and just living a very simple life with a good ethos regardless of extraneous circumstances. Fantastic. But there were so many parts that I kind of felt like I was watching a Bukowski novel. I think I got the name right, Charles. And there was just some weirdness about it. I was like, I think I'm uncomfortable, but I was laughing. But I think I'm uncomfortable and just kind of weird. So before we get like into more detailed stuff, I'm gonna choose here because I have an idea how both of you feel. Bobby, tell me how you feel about the movie.
Yeah, I mean, one of the really interesting things for me is trying to separate this movie from the seemingly like cultural phenomenon that it is. So like trying to watch it and see it for what it is versus like how I know a lot of people react to it.
You're
Lebowski for
right. We know this movie like big time because of pop culture.
right,
Like
like
so many things are people call back to it all the time.
there's Lebowski Fest, and then I even know that one of my friends always said, "Shut up, Donnie," or like some kind of like, just randomly like some kind of like Donnie reference, and it'd be like, okay, he's saying the Big Lebowski, and I mean, don't even get started on the dude with the dude abides, and all the dude quotes, and I know there's full theaters of packed people that can just quote every single line. And so for me, it's a little bit difficult to kind of separate what I'm watching from knowing that this thing is like a cultural phenomenon and that so many people love it. And so to be honest, I'm kind of like more along the realms of how you are, Austin, where I'm basically watching it and I'm enjoying it, but part of me is thinking like, what am I missing? Where like there's all these people who just absolutely love this thing to death, and why am I not part of them?
I mean, maybe
Although
this is a little bit of time traveling to 1998. and kind of attaching to that moment because maybe there just wasn't a movie that felt exactly like this, but there were weird, quirky films before this, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like the Coen brothers have made like really great movies, and I mean, you could talk about Wes films like Grand Budapest Hotel and like all the other Wes Anderson movies and all those kinds of things, and certainly like a lot of movies in the '90s, like especially the independent scene in the '90s. It's like all sorts of weirdness and fun, but I mean, like it is kind of a little bit difficult to overcome what it is, but I mean, that being said, I do wanna kind of speak about the structure and, like, everything. I mean, I
Well,
find it
hold on before we go down that road. I do want to ask because you did mention the idea of separating it from the pop culture zeitgeist, the thing that we all have in our head. Is it pertinent for us to do that separation? Bob, you can answer it after Matt answers it. Matt, tell us how you felt about the movie. Do you think it's important to separate the pop cultureness of it?
Watching this movie again first reminded me that the first time I watched it was on TV, which watching it again, I'm like, oh yeah, there's a lot of stuff that got cut out of that version. And I probably watched it on DVD after that at a friend's place because it is one of those kind of movies that people will throw on. And I do feel that, and I know I'm probably going to get hate for it, but I feel like it's one of those movies that the quotes are better than the movie. And people will sit there and quote movies. And I could put it into the same category, not necessarily as far as the quality and how the movie itself works, but in the quotability of it, of, Spaceballs and Princess Bride, where people will quote the movie and the quotes themselves, I feel, supersede the movie itself. And watching the movie again, I do kind of feel like it's it's the ongoing catchphrase for Seinfeld. It's a series about nothing. I feel like this was a movie about nothing, where it was a series of events that were just stringed together with bowling alley scenes conjoining them together, and then all these little moments of very quotable sections where it's more about how a series of eccentric characters were thrown together into a small event, and how can it cascade from there. And you get this movie, and I could see how it was enjoyable at the time, for sure, and how people can enjoy it just like people enjoy the Rocky Horror picture show. But yeah, I don't think you can separate it because people will inevitably, those are the parts, the pop culture that drive the fondness for this movie more than anything else, because quite frankly, I don't know what else really does.
Okay, that's wow. That is an indictment, Bobby. So now that you heard how Matt feels, and again saying that the pop culture portion of it does still tie in, were you working to split that out for yourself, and then tell us how you felt about the
I
plot and
mean,
the story?
there was a little bit of work of trying to split it out for me. I mean, what's interesting is so for me, a lot of the time, even talking about these movies is trying to separate like, okay, like what you actually get from the film versus what went into it versus, like all these other kinds of things. And, like just looking at the film for what it is, it's kind of hard for me to do, like given all this other stuff. I mean, and I don't even know the complexity of all of the, you know, how much people love it. I had heard that there was a like kind of like a religion created called like the Church of the Latter Day Dudes or something like that. Like I could be having that wrong, but I do know that there's like a massively extreme level of love for this movie, and I think that having something maybe that's a little less than that is it's maybe like not for us, but at some in some cases like a opposing viewpoint.
Yeah, thinking about certain parts, and maybe this is something you could speak more to in detail, Bobby, but just looking at those really specific weird off the wall scenes that seemed interjected into the middle of the film, feeling like they were very interesting, but I was almost taken out at that point because I kept saying, well, when is this little weird interlude going to be finished? I kind of felt like it was like I ate the wrong piece of candy at Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Like I was getting taken somewhere that was going to be bad for me, and Oompa Loompas are coming out soon.
No, I'm actually really glad you mentioned that, and I didn't forget the second half of your question from earlier. I just was waiting for you to interject, but no, I mean, I really think that I mean, it was pretty interesting why they did those kinds of things, and the kind of like the way I can describe it in my mind is to just be calling it like plussing and adding to it, because when you think about it, this movie is like can be potentially like very small and in lesser artistic filmmakers, just like it takes place in okay, like here's a bowling alley, of course, and like a small part of a grocery store and several people's houses and various other small locations. And so like in a lesser filmmaker or a lesser like less creative like kind of entity that the Coen brothers and Roger Deakins are, like it totally seems like this movie like goes above and beyond to just like go out there and show something that's way more different. Because really, like, this movie could have been like Clerks, right? Like, like basically in two or three different locations in black and white, and like, hey, it's just a bunch of dudes talking to each other. Dudes, no pun intended, but dudes talking to each other, and basically that's all it is. But I think one of the interesting things about this movie is that despite it being that, they kind of go have all those interesting kind of things, and they have this like strange like third person Sam Elliott narrator who's not really the third person, who's like a character in it also, but they have all these various interesting things in it.
Well, let's talk about the Sam Elliott character because I kind of want to maybe Matt. What did that character even? What was he doing? I think I have an idea how you feel about narration in film typically.
Well,
Um, was this
yeah.
even effective narration? I don't think it was.
Well, and I mean, I think that was almost kind of the point where even the narration itself lost track of itself as it was going. At the very beginning, anyways, where he was just kind of rambling. My interpretation of it, and I think that there's actually been um, some delving into the deeper meanings of the movie and the dude and everything else that goes on it, where I honestly kind of interpreted Sam Elliott's character as like God, basically, right? Like he was supposed to be like God or an angel or some entity that was overseeing the over events of what was going on in the movie, because obviously he wasn't there during all those events, yet he knew of them and was speaking of them as it was going. And I think even the first time they met, he had kind of made a comment about the personality of the dude, somebody he had never really met, and how like, oh, that's kind of what you do as the dude, right? Like you just keep doing that. And so that was kind of my interpretation, was it was supposed to be an like omnipotent, character in it, because you're right, it's not just a narrator, it's a character that's in it, but it's not. I think he even just kind of appeared out of thin air.
Yeah, he did.
And
The way
then
that
they made this
panned
shot,
over.
yeah,
Yeah,
very
he was there.
intentional.
He pans over, he comes in, and then kind of like blesses him with like, "Hey, I know you don't understand everything you're doing, but the way you're living is a-okay."
Yeah, yeah, no, I totally. That's exactly the impression that came off with the character, and to be honest, I'm fine with it, because Sam Elliott and his narration, regardless of what he's saying, he could read the dictionary, and I'd be there for it. So
I feel like one of the reasons they did that was just because like, hey, we have Jeff Bridges who's playing this really interesting character, and we have Sam Elliott. Don't they need to interact with each other just because their interaction would be interesting, and like basically no other reason to like totally break the whole like fourth wall idea of a third person omniscient narrator?
I mean, their fourth wall breaking felt uncomfortable. Every single time they did it, I was like, "I'm not this isn't The Office. This doesn't feel right to me."
yeah, I can see that, and but at the same time, that's just Cohen brothers, right? They take the norm and they turn around and look at it from a different point of view, and like, okay, well, you're used to a story like this. Well, this is how we would tell that kind of story, because you could easily, when I was watching it, it's not the same, but I was thinking of other movies that had somewhat similar premises. I mean, it's not shot for shot or anything like that, but it kind of reminded me of like Dumb and Dumber in a way, with the whole ransom money and stuff like that. And I think there's been a couple other movies that have kind of had, like the trophy wife who's been kidnapped and kind of like the story that revolves around it. So the story itself is a fairly common story. But it's just the Coen brothers taking a spin at it. And like I said, putting those very weird characters into that scenario and just seeing how it can unravel upon itself. And I think that that's just what happens with their take on a narrator and narration. Like, is it even a requirement for this movie? Is that narration required? Is his involvement in the scenes actually required? And how it kind of tied off on the end? Like there was no real need for it, but it was there because maybe they, saw a Sam Elliott commercial. It was like, oh, we
I've
need
got
that.
a great idea. Yeah, no, that actually makes sense because you're right. I think it probably could be removed and I wouldn't miss it one bit. But man, does he sound good? So I will take that dictionary podcast, please. Let's talk about another character, John Goodman as Walter Sobchak, because I found I want to say he did a great job because I wanted to punch him in the face. Which made me really realize he was doing great. That was a very, very extreme, basically creating a contrast against the dude who was just like, dude, we just need to chill. And he was the amateur, as he liked to call everyone else. He was the amateur. But how did you feel about that character, Bobby?
No, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, and the fact that you said that he was there basically to be a contrast to Jeff Bridges' characters sounds really on point to me, because it does seem like, okay, like he was really there to like kind of like drive things forward, and often, like you said, they were going in the very wrong direction. But like I think it was really interesting. And I mean, John Goodman, like I think he's an underratedly very good actor. I mean, like one of the things I remember John Goodman for is like Roseanne type of roles where he plays like the dad in like a sitcom. And so you have that kind of character and this kind of character where he's like crazy, off the rails, kind of like super like I'm a veteran kind of guy, and always still wearing his like tactical vest, like even out bowling, and like it's okay if I pull a gun or do anything else wild. It's just
I mean, maybe that's where there's an element of, I'm trying to think back again to my youth when I enjoyed it. There's like an element of I've met people like these people, and maybe not to this nth degree, and I don't run in these circles. So let me put that in there. But there was like a truth to each character that you've seen in places that, like you said, Matt, maybe that's all this was coming down to in terms of here's a really basic story, but let's take these people that they probably met in real life that you say people like this shouldn't exist, and just ramp them up to 11 to really kind of display that extremeness in the film. One thing that I noted and I mentioned, which surprised me, not someone who is anti-cursing or anything, but oh my goodness, were they cursing a lot in this film. I made a note very early on because I did not expect to hear that many F-bombs.
Yeah,
I
that
think
was that they decided they were going to do that R rating, and they went with it. Between that and the occasional nudity that was in the movie, there's like let's just earn it at that point. And let's be clear, this isn't a Tarantino level of profanity. It is there, but it's not to the degree that I would say was completely off-putting. Like it did bug me, and to be honest, at times it felt heavy-handed. But at the same time, it wasn't. I didn't feel terribly uncomfortable. There was words they could have used in this movie that they did not use. They got close. They got really close with Walter's character, but it never really got to that level where I started feeling like super kind of like creep, like just to that edge. They never pushed it. So
Yeah, it's here I'll find something for us just to kind of go with. And in terms of watching it, and I'll ask Matt specifically because I think it'll be more of a challenging question for you. What do you think is the greatest strength for this film? Like,
um
don't say the
I
quotes.
no, I'm not gonna. I think that the the thing that probably could have been its weakness, because I did kind of note while we were watching it, I was like, how are the dude Walter and Donnie friends? Like they just don't seem like the types that would be friends. But as I was watching it, and the more I thought about it, they were they did kind of balance each other out, because the dude was very relaxed, but to the point where it's detrimental to his to himself and those around him, whereas Walter is extreme and can go very extreme. Donnie's honestly the most normal one in the group. um and it's how friend groups happen. You do have those distinct personalities. You like to think that friends join because of their commonalities, and they did bowling. And they were the misfits of the bowling alley, most likely, and so they just kind of joined up. And that's honestly the reason why I think that the thing that is the greatest strength in this movie is the characters. They, as eccentric as they are and as crazy and weird as all the characters, from those three to Julianne Moore's character to Jesus, there's just these very extreme characters, and it does kind of work in a way, probably because this movie is so mundane, that they need to be that. And that's only why this movie even can hold itself up, because you have those characters doing these kind of crazy level 11 things.
Yeah, just to throw out the names, because these are familiar faces that I think we love from a lot of other things. Maybe not just necessarily in here, even though they did a great job with them. So we got Steve Buscemi as Donnie, and always love seeing him. John Turturro as Jesus. My God, that the fact that I just learned that they made a movie in 2019 about this character, I might want to put myself through it, but that's a little bit of punishment.
You can see why they did.
You can see why they did, right?
Yeah.
Philip Seymour Hoffman as Brant. I mean,
Yeah.
it's always good seeing him. So there's people that we love here. It's just, man, mundane is a great word for this.
Well, and to be honest, if you go back and you look at it, the movie just has like a non-resolution. When you really think about it, it just kind of falters. Like, yeah, the dude kind of figures it out, but it doesn't really go anywhere. There is no grand resolution. I can't remember what Tara Reid's character's name was. Was it Bambi or something like that?
Bunny.
Bunny.
Bambi might have been better.
Yeah, right. She comes back and they confront, Lebowski, but that's about it. There's no grand revelation about it. You never see Julianne Moore again. Like, there really isn't a huge wrap up other than the confrontation with the nihilists and Donnie's passing, and that's pretty much the end of the movie. There's really not much more beyond that. It doesn't have a grand finale in the traditional sense. So
yeah, I think you're hitting on what I think I was really into way back when, which is that in a way it mimicked life, because nothing was completed. It just kind of went on, and you're right. They just moved through their process, and there's probably tons of things we want answers to, like, oh, Bunny did actually go home, and she was running around naked at the end of the movie. It's like, well, what happens from there? Well, the whole entire point was to just, we don't care. He's about to have a kid. I mean, that's a hell of a scene with Julianne Moore rocking herself under the covers to ensure that she could conceive a baby. Oh, come on. Like, what kind of insane thing is that? And then you get nothing else from it. And I think that there's probably an element of that I enjoyed. Right now, I want answers. I'm tired. I just want answers.
I will say that there was moments in this movie that I definitely did laugh or whatever, but the moment that to me defines it more than anything else was the chair and the door. That scene was just like, that was like chef's kiss for like the kind of comedy that this movie kind of represents. Just the amount of effort that goes into nailing down that 2x4, setting up the chair, and then the door just opens the other direction. It was like, that was just beautiful.
It was a very simple thing. So we'll pivot to a question that we always ask. Bobby, it's 2021. Are you recommending this film to your friends, to your loved ones?
I mean, I feel like you have to, because, I mean, just for, like we mentioned, the cultural relevance of it. And, I mean, it is a very interesting movie. I mean, maybe it's not your cup of tea in terms of comedy or the kind of idea that it is, but I mean, I think it's at least worth seeing, if for nothing else, just to see what all these other people are talking about.
Yeah, that's a good point, Matt.
I think that it's the kind of movie that only works if you're watching it with a group of friends, especially ones who already like the movie, and or you are consuming libations of some sort. And
I think the movie itself hints that you should be doing
yeah,
that.
that should be like that at the beginning of the movie.
We should have started this with a White Russian.
Exactly.
I'm gonna say something a little different here. Maybe don't watch it, but go find those cultural touch points. Like maybe watch Family Guy where they reference it, or just see all the things that do pull from it. Because I'm sure you can get a YouTube clip that'll show you all the key parts without necessarily having to suffer. Oh, did I say suffer? Um, so there's just it's a thing. This is a very interesting film. Just note that if you watch it today, again, I'm coming back to it. Mundane is a fantastic word.
And it, to be fair, watching it, it does feel way longer than it actually is.
It feels really long.
It dragged. It dragged more than I thought it would.
So if you just want to slow down, maybe have a White Russian, pop it in. But I think a YouTube video is the way to go. So as always, thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes you eat the bear, and sometimes, well, he eats you.